The Liberal Party's state president in Victoria, Michael Kroger, has resigned following Labor's landslide victory in last weekend's Victorian State election.
Mr Kroger was under pressure to resign from senior party figures, including former Victorian Premier Jeff Kennett. Well, to discuss this and more, we're talking now with Liberal MP Tim Wilson. Tim Wilson, thanks so much for your time this morning. Do you welcome the resignation of Michael Kroger?
Well, I'm not in the business of welcoming or applauding anyone's resignation, but I think the division needs to move forward. Everyone's quite clear that the last election last Saturday was a disaster. So our choice is what we do and how we respond and how we're going to make sure we put ourselves in the best position to hold the seats we have in Victoria at the federal election, win seats at the federal election, and of course go on to win the next state election against the Labor Party.
Now, speaking of which, we were covering the Victorian election last weekend, that landslide victory for Labor. And since then, your colleague Julia Banks has quit the party, the Liberal Party, and moved to the crossbench. It seems that your own MPs and the public are rejecting the direction that the Liberal Party is taking. Do you see why they're doing that?
Well, I've raised criticisms earlier in the week about some of the issues that voters raised directly with me on polling booths, and some of the criticisms or concerns that I've raised internally at times. It's quite clear that people do have concerns about some areas of policy, but I think what we need to be is a forward-looking, modern Liberal Party that's delivering for the next generation of Australians and giving the opportunity that people seek, as well as the security that older Australians want as well. That's the beauty of the Liberal Party. It's always been a party for every Australian rather than just being for sectional interests like the Labor Party.
Although, do you feel like at the moment there is one section that is particularly dominant at the moment, at the cost of other sections?
I don't feel that way at all, because I think there are some sections that are very vocal, but some of us are very strong, ardent and prepared to stand up and defend the good Liberal tradition, the good Victorian Liberal tradition of a forward-looking, modern Liberal Party that connects with people on the issues relevant to them, which means that we believe in economic leadership and stewardship, social cohesion and stewardship in bringing everybody together, and environmental stewardship and making sure we give the next generation as good or better environment than we inherited.
Have you ever considered moving to the crossbench and perhaps running as an independent?
I was elected as a Liberal Member of Parliament. That was the trust I gave to the people of Goldstein when I was elected. I think the only honourable way that I could do that is to resign and contest as an independent at a by-election, and that has never crossed my mind.
Now, the government also announced this week that there would be an early budget, flagging that return to surplus. Now, that has meant a very truncated sitting schedule. It looks like there'll be only around 10 days of Parliament sitting before a budget and the next election potentially next year. Why is the government wanting such a short sitting schedule in Parliament?
Well, it's not a short sitting schedule at all. I mean, we don't normally sit in January. We're sitting 2 weeks in February. We've then, of course, got school holidays and other things in March. And then we're sitting for the budget session. Then we have an election. This is entirely predictable. I know there's this sort of narrative or line being put out there by the Labor Party, but this is kind of basically a normal sitting schedule in the circumstances.
Well, what about, though, essential policy? Is 10 days enough to kind of address issues like legislation on energy or tax or potentially a national corruption watchdog? Have you got enough time to address those issues?
Well, we have enough time to deal with the issues that the country needs us to focus on right now, but next year's an election year. We know that. It can either be in March or it can be in May, and so because of that we have to take out about 5 weeks or thereabouts for a campaign. That's what the Constitution dictates to us, not what we decide we can do.
Now, the government's minority position, particularly with the moves that Julia Banks has made this week, could see Labor and the crossbench work together to veto government legislation or to pass bills without the coalition. Are you concerned that that's something that might happen?
Well, I believe in parliamentary democracy. If people can get the numbers, they get the numbers, and that's representative of what the people want, or their representatives want, and they'll be judged at the next election based on how they conduct themselves. Labor tried it this week. They failed, because in the end, the government is the only party that can form, or Liberal Party and the National Party together are the only parties that can form government. And if you look at the crossbench, the vast majority of them have sympathies with us versus sympathies with the Labor Party.
Julia Banks's defection also drew attention to the coalition's lack of women. There are now just 12 of the coalition's 74 lower house MPs that are women. Do you think that is a fair representation of the Australian population?
Well, I've always wanted more women in Parliament, in both the House of Representatives and in the Senate. I'll continue to encourage and support women. You know, if you look at the federal seat of Macnamara, we have an outstanding candidate, Kate Ashmor, and I'm hoping she'll go on and win, and she'll be another one in the Parliament. There'll be other candidates as well in other seats in other states. So I think there's rich with opportunity, but we can pre-select women. The public have got to vote for them too.
Well, there are a number of MPs in the government, in the coalition, saying that they want more women. So why is it not happening then? What are the reasons?
Well, as I said, we have an open democratic process for pre-selections. Candidates get put up, they get voted for, but they don't get voted for based on their gender. They get voted for on what people perceive is in the best interests of their community. But then ultimately the public needs to vote for them. I just said, we picked an outstanding woman, Kate Ashmor, in the federal seat of Macnamara, but the people have to vote for them at the general election, vote for her at the general election, and I'll be supporting her to make sure that she can be successful against a man who's the Labor Party candidate.
But are these women being put into winnable positions, winnable seats?
Well, of course they are, and we have women in the Senate and in the House of Representatives as well. But every time there's an opportunity for rejuvenation and regeneration, we should absolutely be encouraging as many women as possible to stand, because one of the beautiful things about the Liberal Party is not just that it was a party for everybody. It was actually brought together by many women's organisations because they shared the values and the concerns that Liberals had about how we have to be a country that treats everybody with equal dignity and worth, and that particularly is around advancing the interests of women.
On one other topic, just briefly, Tim Wilson, you're chairing a committee looking into the removal of refundable franking credits and the implications of that. What is it that's been found so far in that, and what do you hope to come from this?
Well, this inquiry is directly looking at what Bill Shorten wants to do with not just retirees' tax refunds, but every Australian's tax refunds. In the next election, Bill Shorten isn't going to go in and promise these naked, straightforward new taxes. He's doing it surreptitiously. So if you submit your tax return and you might get a bit of money back from the ATO because you've overpaid, Bill Shorten is going after that tax refund. And that's what that inquiry is looking into. It's looking directly at how Labor is going to attack people's tax refunds so they can Labor can fund its agenda should they come to government. And what's the data found? That some people are going to lose a third of their income if they're retirees. Many people will be pushed below the poverty line, and I think that's disgusting and disgraceful.
Won't many people who would be losing out of this, particularly wealthy people who have self-managed superannuation funds?
No, that's one of the great misconceptions, because the way the refundable franking system works, you'll still be able to use it against any income that incurs tax. So when we introduced a $1.6 million cap on tax-free superannuation, those people will be paying tax and they'll still get the full benefit. The people who will get smashed are those on lower and middle incomes, those who have saved for their retirement, taken responsibility, sacrificed to be able to stand on their own 2 feet. I mean, what sort of a political party seeks to push down the financial stairs 85-year-olds? That's Bill Shorten and the Labor Party.
All right, Tim Wilson, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you.